Okay, and now the much sought after motion tracking. I'm not great at this, so bear with me as I reverse engineer what we're doing. I'm going to close that. Okay, so what we have here is two elements. We have a ship and we have a city park. And I have tracked the ship to stay essentially over the same position in the city at the edge of the park and the neighborhood. However, just to make it a little sexier, I have it with a drop shadow and I have it turning as if it's going to go somewhere else. And as you can see, the element disappears. The pivot wasn't necessary. I just felt like it gave it a little more elegance. And so I want to show you how easy it is once you've got the tracking working to do something like that. All right. So we are going to start by pulling in these ingredients. So in the folder that you downloaded for today, the week 12 stuff, there is a tracking folder. And we need our also the New York top down clip, and we need the one labeled top 2. So this is top 2, and this is New York top down. Bring those two into your project. And New York top down. All right. And this project, I would, if you didn't already, let's call it motion tracking so that you know that's where you can get this example. And then I would create a new comp. And let's see, I'm going to leave it set to 30. We had it that way for the last, that's fine. I think it's fine. And then I'm going to call this park ship track. Sure, something like that. All right, black background, 11 seconds, all that's fine. We're not really changing anything else. I'm leaving it set to 30 frame rate, 30 per second frame rate. Although I can check and see if it really matters. Nah, it doesn't really matter. All right, we're just leave it at 30. It should work. Okay, so we need our two elements. We need our New York top down. That's our bottom element, right? So let's go ahead and throw that down there. Why won't it let me rescale? This is so big. Oh, it's even bigger. Awesome. I thought at one point I just widened this out and I can't put it back. All right, whatever. Okay, so New York top down, yay. Now you'll notice already we have a problem. This footage is not the same shape as our 16:9 comp. We've got a little black bar at the top and bottom. If you don't, make sure you are set to fit so you can actually see those. So I'm going to tell you this is probably like drone footage shot in like the wrong aspect ratio. It's not 16:9. It's something a little bit tighter than that, which is a 4K, I think, resolution, even though this footage is not 4K. But sometimes there is like a cinema 4K shape, which is different. So I'm going to recommend that you go ahead, open your transform controls for that New York scene, go to scale, and let's set it for like 110. And boom, that fixes our problem. Now it fills the frame, and now we won't have to worry about running out of footage when we get to the edge of the frame. All right, and I didn't set any keyframes. It's the whole entire time that it's sitting here, it's going to be scaled up. And I'm going to hit N at the end of that clip so that my timeline will stop and loop at that point and go back to the beginning. All right, next we're going to go get our top 2 clip, which is our ship. And as I drop it in, it will come over the whole thing. And as you will see, it is bigger actually than our background. So we need to scale this bad boy down a little bit as well. So I'm going to open the transform. I'm going to go to scale, and I'm going to scale it down to where I have a little bit of a room at the front and back at the edge of frame. Okay, just a little bit out here, so so it feels like it's where it belongs. All right. Now, as you probably would have guessed, because every time we touch one of these ships, we got to clean it up, right? We need to mask this. So let's go get our pen tool. Let's maybe blow up. I'm at 40%. I'm going to go to like 100%. I'm going to use the space bar to push my world around, and I'm going to start drawing and masking off this because we got to get rid of the black. Of course, yes, we could do some sort of fancy luminance key, but this is the more proper way to do it. I'm doing a very rough job because it's not the point of this exercise, so I'm not going to obsess. But, and I would recommend the same to you. Don't be too ridiculous about it because we're going to keep moving when we get to the end of this. But make it look okay. We can always choke it down a little bit and make it a little more clean. See, I'm not even putting all the right amount of points and stuff in here, just because I would rather have it done than be right. Not a good way to live your life, but for our classroom exercise, I think it's fine. All right, and I'll continue to click around here. Get around some of these jets, even though they're in the dark. I don't want to lose them completely. And then boom, I click the things back together and life is good. And I go back to fit and now I can see my ship. Yay. Doesn't look half bad. I might choke it back a little bit. So there is now a mask being applied to that layer. I can uncollapse the mask controls and I can go to mask expansion and of course go into negative numbers and that'll actually choke it back a smidge, which is pretty good. And then I could even feather it just a little bit. I don't want it to be like glowy and soft. I just want to make sure that if I had any jaggies on there, they get cleaned up a little bit. And that's not bad. And of course, as long as the pink dots are there, I can't really tell what I'm doing. So I'll click off of it and go, it's not too bad. Actually, I think my feathering is too much. It looks a little weird. So I'm going to just turn the feathering off. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, pretty good. Now, this is where we get complicated, right? All right, so get my notes. So we are going to click on the background element, the thing we need to track with, which is our New York top-down MP4. And we are going to go to the animation menu at the top. And we are going to go down to the track in Boris Effects Mocha. When we do that, an effect gets added to this track. So your effects controls probably pop up. If they didn't, then open them. Should be able to get to them in the window menu. No, not. How do you get to effects controls if not there? Okay, well, mine popped up. Hopefully yours did too. All right, and then to open the plugin, basically, we need to double click on the Mocha logo. All right, so mine, I already have scaled big on my screen. Yours may not be big enough. If there's a blue button that says start, be sure and click on that because you're going to want to start. I'm going to scale mine back now because I had it set really big on a different monitor. But on this one, it's too big. All right, so here is our top-down shot. You can move your little playhead around from forward to back. I'm going to say yes. Let's go to the first frame. And then, for the sake of this example being as easy as we possibly can make it, we're going to want to pick a high contrast element somewhere on the right-hand side over the buildings to use as our anchor point. And preferably, it won't leave the frame. So if I scroll all the way to the end of my clip, I want to get a sense of like how much of the bottom of the image I lost so that I, in fact, don't pick something that's actually going to leave the frame. So I'm going to tell you right now, if I'm basing it on contrast, I've had pretty good luck with this white rooftop building here. It's worked pretty well for me. I didn't do anything after the mask other than I added the Mocha effect to the background plate. So basically, I was on the background and I went to the animation menu and said open or apply Boris Mocha effect. And then I went into here by double clicking on the logo Mocha and it opened a new window for me and all I can see is my background. That's as far as we got. So again, to make clear, this is even blocking my Oh, that's interesting. So I'm going to tell you when I tested this, I used this building as my anchor point because it's pretty contrasty right there and it worked pretty well. There are a lot of schools of thought for getting a good motion track, bigger space, further apart, corner pin. There's all kinds of stuff you can dig in to get heavy lifting motion tracking skills down. But for us, this works pretty well, and I think it's a good place to start. So for an intro class, I think this is good. We're going to say, yes, I want to track that. And I'm confident by going to the end that it never leaves my frame. So I know for sure it's always going to be there when I need it. All right. So once we've sort of visually figured out where we're going to be tracking, then we're going to draw some anchor points. All right. So to draw the anchor points, I have to go to the spline layer tool, create X spline layer tool. It looks like an ink pen with an X. All right. We got to Mocha by clicking on the track that we're tracking, which is our lower track, our New York down shot, and then going to the animate menu and then picking Boris Mocha there, and that will add the effect. And then you can go to the effects controls to click on the Mocha logo. That's how we got where we are for those that are trying to catch up. All right. So just to demonstrate that again, we finished our tracking. We scaled it down a little bit so that our ship looked nice over the horizon, over the background here. I clicked on the layer that I want to track. I went to the animation menu and I went track in Boris Mocha. And as soon as I did that, it added an effect to that layer called Mocha AE. And it opened my effects controls here to show me it. And we're going to do some stuff in this interface later, but the first thing we have to do is launch Mocha itself. So I double click on the motion, on the logo. It's trying to give me additional help. All right. And then all we did in here was we looked at our clip and made sure that we can pick something we can track to over here that is high contrast. And this white building against this mostly clear road is pretty good. There's a decent amount of contrast here. And I just wanted to make sure it didn't leave the frame and leave me hanging with nothing to track with. So it looks good. So we're going back to the beginning of the timeline, to the beginning of this clip, and we're looking in this area. And now we're going to actually draw a box around what we want it to track with. So we are going to the little pen tool, which is up in the top left-hand corner, about under the word movie, which is actually a list. It's underneath that. There's a little pen tool, and it's, if you just point at it and don't click it, it says create X-spline layer tool. All right, I'm going to click on that and make that my current tool. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to draw a box around the outside of this building. So I'm drawing points around it so that it's easy to see. And it wants to do more than 4 points, but if I click back on the first point, it will close the box that I drew. All right, so it's kind of hard to see, but I just drew right around here a weird bounding box. The box ends up red, and there are little blue lines offshooting from it to show you where it is. All right. Now, we want to tell it, we've told it this is the region to keep track of. Now we need it to track. So there is a track button over here on the left-hand side. There's track forward, stop, or track backwards. All right, again, I will circle it in case you can't see it. We're going to track forward with this button. There is also a track backwards next to that, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go forward because we're already parked in the beginning of the clip. All right. So I'm going to click it, and then I'm going to wait a second, and it's going to start doing the math, and then it's going to start looking at each frame, and it's going to keep that bounding box exactly around that area that I said pay attention to. All right. And it's clicking along. What it's actually doing is it's creating a bunch of keyframes for you to later steal and use in your piece. This is all about creating keyframes so that so you don't have to do it by hand. Why is your ship not cutting out in the black? Um, if you double clicked it, you could have a second tab open, and that may be what you're looking at. So look at your playback window tab and see if there's in fact like this up here. See if you're actually on the right thing. It's a possibility. Yes, we have somebody, Desmond's got a pretty good video card, so his is chugging through quickly. Mine finished, which is yay me. Now, you can turn on this planar grid, which is basically to show you the surface that it's going to try to track. And you can check your work. So if I hit play down at the bottom, then you can play it and see. Now, this timeline starts playing in reverse because it was already at the end of the timeline, which is a little weird, right? But it's basically going to ping pong back and forth, forward and backwards, just to sort of give you a sense of how that plane is now been married to that element in the scene. All right, so mine's just going up and down, and I'm looking at if I'm happy with the way that it tracked. And I am. I'm not seeing really any imperfections. Now, there are tricks where you can make this plane bigger and, really get the subtleties of what it's doing or not doing. But I'm not going to get into that because I think it's just more confusing than just watching it at the size that it is now and going, yeah, that looks pretty good. All right. So when we did our motion track, I kind of skipped over it, but there are different variables on this left-hand side of how much detail you want to do, you want to actually keep track of as it's tracking. So this area here is where you can actually tell it, oh, I don't care about perspective, which we technically really didn't need in this case. We just cared mostly about up and down, left and right, right? And then maybe scaling, maybe a little rotation, but a rotation can get nutty. If you don't have a good clean shape, that can get really confusing. So if your track sucks, you might want to rule out any of these that you don't actually need and then retrack it. Okay, so I just hit play and figured out, I guess, that I didn't need perspective. It didn't actually turn on the perspective, which is fine because it didn't need it. If all of yours are on and yours is really slow, that could also be why it's taking longer, but it's still going to come back to how fast your computer can do math. And that, if you have a GPU, is going to go faster than just a regular CPU in most cases. All right. So, but the point is, we now have a decent track here. And I left on what I left on, so I got what I got, and it was fine, which is why we're trying to do the simplest example possible. But if you try to track and it looks like crap at this point, your plane that you turn on here with this pink grid is like jumping all over the place, then you may say, all right, it's trying to rotate and I don't want it to rotate. So you might turn rotate off and then retrack, and then it'll do a better job. Now it won't try to rotate. It'll just pay attention to the left and right, X and Y, all that kind of stuff. All right, so just turn off what doesn't work. Mine worked pretty good. Now we got to save this. So there is a little save button here at the top, save the project, which is an arrow pointing down. Once you know you've clicked save, we can close the window. All right, so we need a null layer. So I am going to go up to the top to the layer menu, and I'm going to go new null object, and it puts it on top. All right. Now, the effects were applied to the New York top down. So I'm going to go back to where Mocha lives right here. And I'm going to open the little collapsible window here inside the effects controls that says tracking data. All right. So all that information just got saved to a project file that Mocha is keeping track of. okay, is basically what has happened. All right. So what we want to do is we want to export, we want the export option, which is down here at the bottom. We want the export option to be set to transform. Okay, so for the average thing, transform is what we're actually going to want. There are corner pins and some other tricks, but we're not going to use that right now. We're just doing transform. Okay, and then we want it to create the tracking data. And that is actually up higher. It's almost at the top of this little section. I will circle back and describe corner pin in a minute. Yes, that's fine. I'll be happy to do that. So we want to create tracking data from what it saved in the project already. So I say yes, create the tracking data. And if you remember, when we first tracked, it said, do you want to put it on layer 1 or the other layer? And layer 1 was the default. I left it at that. So now here I'm just messing with layer 1. So hit OK. So unless you clicked on something extra, you shouldn't need to do anything but a standard layer 1. And then we want to apply the export to the null. So apply the export. This is where I have to get this right. Transform. Oh, layer export to, sorry. So I'm applying it, but I didn't tell it where. It said nowhere. Apply. So we said we want to use transform, not corner pin. We're going to circle back to corner pin in a minute. We're going to export to what? We're going to go to the null layer because it gives us a little more control. So we're saying apply all these new keyframes to null, and then we can apply the export. And then if I do U under null, you will notice to see all the keyframes, look at all the stinking keyframes that are already set for us. Jillions of them under position, scale, and rotation. They're all still, they all carried over all that data. And we know already, since the null's moving like it's supposed to, we know how to marry more than just, we know how to marry stuff to the null, right? So we're going to say, I want the ship top 2, and I'm going to route it up to the null. And when you do that, if you hit play, your ship should stay anchored. However, mine is kind of freaking out. Mine's wiggling. I don't know if you can tell, but mine, the butt end of my ship, is kind of going nuts. So that could be scale. It could be the rotation freaking out. I'm not 100% sure, but this is because I had too many variables set when I did it. So let's nuke our null. I'm going to do mine over again. I'm going to open my project again. And I'm going to do this quickly. I'm going to go back. We still have the same motion, same thing, still selected, except all I care about is left to right, up to down. I don't care about rotation. I don't care about scale, perspective, all that crap. I'm going to do it again. It should go pretty quick. And I'm going to look, how many frames was it? Oh, there you go. Yeah, like 240-ish. So while mine is doing a little cleaner job of anchoring this to that, you just did 100. Awesome. I will explain corner pin. So if you can imagine that you wanted to put a fake screen on my phone. All right. So you've got a screen that you want to fake onto this surface. So what you would end up doing is you would end up creating your image, whatever's going to go on there, your graphic, your piece of video, whatever's going to look like is on my phone. And you're actually going to hopefully have a marker on the object, little X points that show you the 4 corners. Okay. And then you take your image that you know is the same shape and you say anchor this corner to the corner that's marked on the object, this corner to the corner that's marked on the object, etc., to all 4 corners. And then instead of having to fake sort of perspective, it actually just leaves as if you literally took a 4-cornered piece of paper and taped it to the front of the page it's actually going to track it and try to make it stretch and everything to fit the surface of the screen at all times. All right. So corner pin fakes the physics of perspective, but it sometimes is more reliable than it trying to figure out all the proper physics involved. Because if the corners just stay locked where they are, it will look more right. Okay. But it is a matter of, sometimes it works better, sometimes it doesn't. There's probably experts who could tell you why it looks so much better than others at other times. I don't really know. All right, I'm going to resave my track. And now I'm going to come down in here and I'm going to create a new null. So I'm going through the process again. New null object. Put it on top. That's great. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, I got to set some things. I want it to be set to transform. So I went to the export option and set it to transform. I want to export that layer to the null layer. And then I want to create the tracking data from the project it just rendered. So I'm going back to layer one again, which is the default, and it should have just imported in the information from Mocha into this plugin. And now I can apply this to the null like I told it was going to, and I hit apply export. And then when I open the keyframes by hitting the letter U on the null track, I see that there are position, scale, rotation, all kinds of settings set for me already. The only thing left to do is to say, take my ship and anchor it to the null so that it does all the tricks that the null does. And then when I play it, it should work. And I'm going to fit this to screen so you can see it better. And when I play it, my ship is now drifting smoother because I turned off some of the adjustments I didn't need, like perspective and things like that. That was unnecessary. All right. If I don't like how low the ship is in the frame, I should be able to go back to my original ship and adjust the positioning here. So if I go to transform here and go to position, I can say, well, let's go to Y. Let's move it up. There. Now it starts off a little higher in the frame and goes down, but it's still anchored to a totally different point. All right. So yes, rotation was rotating mine too much. It got unstable. So when I turned off everything but positioning under the Mocha controls. So basically all the boxes except for the leftmost box. And that is your normal X and Y. And I left those on and that worked. It was a little smoother. And again, it may take multiple tries to get it right. In my experience, it almost always does. All right. Now, in my original example, I had the ship pivoting, which was kind of cool. I did that. Did I do that with the null? Now I gotta look back at how I did it. Is it rotate? Because I thought I turned rotation off. I have rotation keyframes there, but I don't think they're supposed to be there. I think it brought the keyframes over for rotation, so I'm going to nuke them and see if it screws up my motion track. So I just highlighted all the keyframes for rotation, and it seems fine. So I'm going to go to the end of my piece, and I'm going to manually set a rotation keyframe, and I'm going to rotate it. This. I'm going to go back to the beginning, set a keyframe, set my rotation to 0. And now as it turns, it's kind of turning on an axis, which is kind of cool actually. All right. Get a sense of sort of how I'm tinkering with those kinds of things. I can probably move my anchor point, right? We know how to move an anchor point. So if I don't want it pivoting down towards the tip of the ship, then maybe I'll move my anchor point over. So if I put my anchor point here, here, and then I change my position. Actually, I'm jacking around with my anchor point for the null. I don't want to screw up the null. That'll jack up everything. Sorry, anchor point on the old ship. So I can move it over so that the anchor point's more towards the middle of the ship. And then use the X and Y because we haven't really changed positioning on the ship. We only changed it on the null. Now it should rotate in a slightly different manner, a little bit further down. Maybe we do want to mess with the anchor point on the null. Anyway, you get the idea. You can tweak these things to get them to do exactly what you want. Let's see. Sorry, I'm stopping because I'm getting a lot of questions. So positioning right. Yep. I'm not even seeing where to turn these things off. Oh, well, let me open that again. So when we were in the effects controls and I double clicked into my project, the motion track options are over here on the left-hand side. So when I went and did mine over again, the first time I did them, these were all lit up. I went in and I turned them all off except for trans. And that basically meant that it was only worrying about X and Y. It wasn't worried about scale and rotate and some of those imperfections that were jacking up my movement. All right. So that's where I redid it from. And the fewer of those you have on, I think the faster it goes too, right? Less math. So you don't have to mess with the rotate anchor point. But I just was showing you how I was tinkering with it, right? It's pivoting. It's kind of cool because it's kind of repositioning itself, which is kind of nice. How it's, my anchor is wrong, or not wrong, but it's spinning around closer to the tip of the ship, and that's not really what I want. So if I want, I can go into the anchor point controls and I can say, let's pivot this bad boy more around the middle. And then I can go back to the ship positioning controls and I can put it back. And I think that will work. And now it will pivot closer to the center. Let's see if I'm right. Nope. All right. Well, it's luckily that it looks pretty good, even the way it is. There's probably an offset that I'm missing, but you get the idea. All right. So there is one other trick I did in my original one, and that is I had some drop shadow on it. So how did I get my drop shadow? Well, the track that I have here on this version that I don't have on the other is a black solid. Now here's the problem. If I'm going to create a black solid and use the same mask to draw it that I used to cut out my ship, which is what I want to do, right? Because my ship is essentially the shape that I want my shadow to be, right? Because I masked it off. I'm trying to get it to show up so you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, we took the time to mask this off, right? I can't figure out where to click to make it like highlight. But the point is, we took the time to mask this the right shape. I need a shadow to be essentially that shape. But if you remember, when we brought this ship into our comp, it was big. We had to scale it down to get it to fit. So we need, if we're going to create a shadow from that mask, we need the black solid to be as big as the original footage for that mask to fit in it, because the mask we made is too big for 1920 1080. And our shadow will be clipped off on the front and back if we don't make it the same size as the ship. All right, so it's kind of like saying I cut a hole out of this original piece of this photo of the ship. I want to use the same hole that I cut out to cut out a black one that I can blur and make a shadow. I got to have a piece of paper just as big as the original if I'm going to cut out that shape and be able to use it as a margin, you know, as a cutting reference for the other. So what does that mean? A lot of words, right? Okay, so if I go to here and I say I want a new solid, I first need to know how big is this ship layer. So I'm going to go back to my project and I'm going to click on the ship, which is top to JPEG, and it's telling me it's 2,560 by 1,600. So 2,560 by 1,600. So I want to create a layer 2,560 by 1,600. I'm going to do layer new, and I'm going to create a solid. I'm going to let it be black, which is totally fine, but it needs to be 2,560 by 600. Okay. By default, yours will not be. Mine is, because I already said it last time I made one of these. Okay. The point is, if I make a solid that is the right size and shape like that, I can then say, okay, what layer does my shadow need to go? It needs to go between the ship and the background, right? So I'm going to move it down to between top two and New York top down. So now it's all screwed up, right? What I really want to do is I want to steal the mask from my ship layer. So if I uncollapse it and I get down to where I can get to the mask one, I can hit copy, Command C on a Mac, Control C on a PC, and I can go to my solid that I just brought in, and I can paste it, and look at that. Now, we scaled it, right? We made sure it was big enough that we could cut the hole. That worked. Now we have a black cutout hole, but it's the wrong size. Do you remember what scaling size we set the ship for? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? I believe we did like 80%. No. Okay. Well, you can guess and you can get it close. 70. Okay, good. All right. So yeah, maybe we didn't do an exact number. Fine. And then we can blur this, right? So we can go in and we can say, yeah, this is a mask. It should have feathering like any other mask. So as I open the mask, even though I stole it, now I can go in, find feather, I can soften it up, and boom, now we have a cool little movement there. But we have a problem, right? What's happening in our animation? Oh, the ship pivots, but the shadow doesn't. Why does the ship pivot and motion track? Oh, because it's doing what the null is doing. So we just quickly made a shadow. Now we can say, hey, just like you are tracking the null is moving this thing around, I wanted to move the shadow underneath the same way. So if you draw a line from your black solid layer up to the null as well, now your shadow will pivot right along with the object the way you wanted it to. All right, so you can actually cheat off of your previous work. We stole a mask, we had all our moves. This is why we didn't, this is another reason why we don't just go get the motion tracking information and necessarily always apply it directly to the element. If you do it to a null, you can add other things to the null and have it follow. You want to do a cast shadow or a lens flare or something, and it all needs to move with the thing you've tracked. Well, then if you're using a null, you've opened up the possibility of being able to do that. If you didn't, if you'd applied it directly, well, then you got to do things more than once. So by putting all that information, all that tracking data into a null, we opened up the ability to add a shadow as an afterthought, and it was fine. All right. Any other questions? All right. I am going to stop recording and help you guys. But that is basic motion tracking. And there's all kinds of ways to use it with things beyond just comping two believable shots together. You can do graphics onto objects. They're used in commercials all the time to like point at features on an object, something's for sale. Those are really common and clients ask for that stuff all the time. Being able to put logos over people's heads while they walk down the street, little emoticons, something silly like that. These are all kind of in vogue right now, and people will ask you to do it. And now you know how to pull that data out of Mocha, apply it to whatever you want, fix it if it's imperfect, and use it.